الله أكبر الله أكبر.
Assalamu alaikum and welcome to the Islamic Center at New York University podcast, coming to you straight from the heart of New York City. We're building an amazing Muslim community here at ICNYU where everyone is welcomed and respected no matter where you're from or where you're at. This is the place to be. So open your ears and your heart and come along with us on another life-changing journey. Bismillah.
Bismillah. Bismillah walhamdulillah wassalatu wassalam ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man wala. So we're gonna get into where we left off last week in the Seerah, the prophetic biography of the Prophet Muhammad alayhi salam, where we had gotten to a point where we were talking about his childhood, experiencing the loss of his father, the loss of his mother, and the loss of his grandfather, all by the time he was 8. So his father passed before he was born, his mother passes when he is 6, and his grandfather passes by the time he is 8. We talked a lot about the different women who raised him and how he was also exposed to communities of diverse kind of socioeconomic backgrounds, how diversity was also present in his home from a racial standpoint, a cultural standpoint. One of the things that we didn't mention, we won't go into too in detail, but aside from Ayman Baraka, who was in his home, who was an Abyssinian woman, an Ethiopian woman, she's black, rearing him as one of the women who nursed him. The Prophet also has an aunt who is albino that we don't necessarily hear so much about, but you'd want to think about this also within the context of a Meccan society, right? That if you've ever met somebody who is albino these days, it's not necessarily the most kind of common occurrence, but there's a very deep physical manifestation from the condition that they have. And so at a very young age, the Prophet still has people in his life who, just from the standpoint of having these distinct conditions, things that would bear manifestation in these ways that could lend towards, in a society that's heavily stratified, marginalization, alienation, etc. He's growing up with these people and building a sense of not just love for them, but understanding what does love mean more broadly? What does care mean? What does affection mean? How is it that you connect to a person as a whole and be able to find inherent beauty, even what society does not deem to be normatively beautiful at that time? Do you know? And so we want to get into a few other things today in terms of just who the Prophet was, what was his upbringing like, as he's getting now from a place of childhood to patterns of emerging adulthood. Right? What do we mean by this? Do you know? So after he's 8 years old, he's getting to a place now as he's getting closer to an age of discernment. In Sharia, you essentially become accountable when you are post-pubescent from the standpoint, at least of Sunni Islam, that you are now accountable for decisions and choices. Right? Prior to, children of all backgrounds, whether they are Muslim or not, are just considered to be without accountability. So that age of discernment is attached to post-pubescency as being that kind of marker of accountability coming in. So if somebody asks you, do you have to pray 5 times a day as a Muslim? The answer, one would probably say, is yes. But if you say, do you have to pray 5 times a day if you're 7 years old? The answer is no, right? Because they're 7, they're not obligated to do these things. And here now becomes an important thing to also understand that in many cultures outside of our culture, especially amongst young men, right, to think about this objectively, patterns of emerging adulthood in comparison across genders statistically is seen to be where you have more of a display amongst women than men from a younger age. And in this part of the country, the emerging adulthood amongst like men and women is also a little bit more delayed than you would find in other communities around the world, right? If you've ever been in markets in a lot of countries abroad, you could walk up to a stall, there's literally like a 6-year-old running the stall, you know, and not as a gimmick. Like, they know how to get back home. They know how to run that business. They know how to work their hustle, because they have gotten to a place, rightfully or wrongfully, that they have a different opportunity for maturation. And so their ability to understand and comprehend, not just in terms of things that are traumatic or visceral, but just to be able to absorb, is very different, let alone also when it comes to traumatic and visceral experiences. But here, what we want to understand is when we're talking about the prophet of God as a child who is going through this socialization, you don't want to think about it the way that you might think about your everyday average kid who is 6, 7, 8 years of age. You might not even want to fully relate it to your own childhood, not in a way that you have to kind of negate or be self-deprecating, but it's just a little bit different in terms of where and how adulthood starts to emerge within people based off of societally where it is that they're kind of just being brought up and what it is that they're exposed to, right? What does it mean to be sheltered? What does it not mean to be sheltered? Do you know, like, a lot of people these days are in a place where things are really heavy. May Allah make things easy for us. And in understanding the heaviness, there's complexity to what it is that's impacting the heaviness. The constant bombardment of imagery of violence, seeing children being massacred without any mention or recognition of what it is that their actual experiences and narratives are, and so much more that we can understand that creates heaviness. Not all of us, but some of us also have the added challenge emotionally of coming to a place of recognition that what we're waking up to is a reality of what it means to be a minority in this country. And quite often we've lived under kind of blinders that don't necessarily have us realize and recognize that this is what minority experience is. Your wealth, your credential, your training, your degree, none of this is going to be what is going to allow for you to have privilege and power. But when you live in anti-black society, you live in supremacist society, and you are in a place where success is equated to professional ambition, right? It's hard, and you want to objectively understand it, that sometimes living under that sheltered kind of mechanism that enables you to be a model minority in a space that claims primordial understanding of existence, is rooted in whiteness, and has you aspire towards it even when you fundamentally can't get to that point. But at the very least, you're trying your best to stay away from the other end of the spectrum, which is blackness, if you're not a black person. And then you end up being what Malcolm says is the people who are bamboozled. And it's really hard to admit it, that I wake up to reality and say that, hey, you know what? These people actually are not my friends. These people actually could care less about what's happening to me. These people, they don't have any qualms about not validating my feelings or my experiences. And it's hard to feel that. But that's why the Seerah literature is important in so many different ways, because the Prophet, growing up with a black woman in his home who's his mother, is going to also be able to empathetically recognize and understand the importance of how you navigate societies and structures rooted in race and gender-based constructs of discrimination by engaging people who are marginalized, not choosing to work with the ones who oppress them. And so generationally, if you are an immigrant or a child of immigrants in this room, you grow up in one of three modes of existence in the Muslim community. You are either overtly insurized, living in a bubble. You exert overt assimilation, meaning you just give up a lot of yourself. Or potentially there's some aspect of integration that who you are now offering back to society. But across the board, we can see within however many decades of mass influx of immigrants into the United States from various Muslim countries, there was decision made to work with white apparatus as opposed to engaging established Muslim communities that have been here since the time of the slave trade, where at least 30% of Muslims that were brought over were slaves that were brought over were Muslim, at a minimum, if not more. And that's an important thing to understand because it goes into this prism of the Prophet seeing also and living with people who are from low income backgrounds, recognizing what it must be like to have loved ones that come from different racial, cultural backgrounds in front of him. And so as things come in front of him, it's not that he doesn't have emotional reaction to it, but it's not doubled down in the anxiety because he's aware of what it is that's taking place in his society that's problematic. He knows that these are people that bury women alive. Some of us don't want to know about how black people are treated in the country. He knows that if you are not from a certain clan or lineage, you are not going to be treated fundamentally well. We don't necessarily want to admit that we benefit from systems that break down and hold down other people. And so through this, we want to think about who he is as a child at this time and what he's exposed to more broadly from his lived experience, not just our own, but through our own to understand then, well, where are there gaps in our socialization, right? And I say it with love. It's not an easy thing, but a part of the pain that some of us feel right now is that we're waking up to a reality of how we've been treated always, and that money, degrees, job titles, those are not enough to get you favor from the system that you sought validation from that was built to hold you down in the first place. And the prophet has to know these things from a young age because when he gets prophethood, he's going to be the one that dismantles them. The prophet is not sent to be a prophet at a time when there's not a need for reformation or not a need for societal change. Good religion, in our understanding, is not self-serving, nor is it purely just about mechanics and postures. Good religion should bring its practitioner to take on societal ailments. And if your practice of religion is not bringing you to that, you gotta think, well, what's the point in my religion? And we're immersed and embedded within it if you grew up in this country, and there's no country you could have grown up in where there's not some element of oppression and inequity. You just got to think about, what was erasing that part of experience from me? And thinking about that here now from the standpoint of this man, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, who's now 8 years of age. He's experienced a lot of loss of life from loved ones. He's moved around from different communities, Mecca to the Banu Sa'ad, to Mecca to Medina, back to Mecca, different cultures, different experiences. All of this is going to impact where he gets to in terms of what's coming ahead. There's certain things that were taking place societally that we're taught that the Prophet didn't necessarily have interactions with so much. And it wasn't like he didn't try. And it's important to understand this tangibly. There's some narrations, for example, that speak about that the Prophet, who is a shepherd, and we're going to talk about that a lot today, that he had another friend who was a shepherd. And the two of them tried to go out in the evening, and as they were trying to go, his friend who was a shepherd, they wanted to go into Mecca, essentially to go to a party. That's like what they were trying to do. And the man says, like, let's go to this party, and the Prophet said, let's go to the party. And then as he is on his way to this place, the narrations say that he's just kind of struck down unconscious. And then when he awakens, the party's over. And then the second day, he tries to do the same thing, and the same thing happens again. And what the historians of Seerah literature are giving indication to is that there's a lot of things that were taking place at that time that the Prophet just wasn't privy to, he was being protected from. that those were not things that within his psyche he would have experience that he could then have remembrance and memories around, right? Like some of you are exploring Islam, some of you are converts to Islam, some of you came back to religion at a different time in your life. You can think about just how different it is when you have actually experienced something and you know what it feels like versus it's just theoretical. Like friends of mine who go through all kinds of religious transformations, and you have companions of the Prophet of God who talk about drinking alcohol, who talk about committing zina, who give us an indication that Islam is about reality. But when you experience it, then you know what it feels like. And later on, it becomes a different part of you. Do you see what I mean? And so where and how the Prophet is protected from some of these things. It's also said that he never engaged in any form of idol worship, idolatry, during the course of his life. And not only was it something that he did not engage in, but Ali ibn Abi Talib, his cousin, the son of Abu Talib, who was now looking after the Prophet of God, he too was in a place where he was just connected to the Prophet from a young age. Because Ali in his home started to not have like so much in terms of wealth and affluence. So he got paired up with the Prophet of God at a very young age, that even later on, when they say that Khadija was the first convert to Islam, right, from everybody, Abu Bakr was the first from the men, and they said Ali, he never converted because he embraced Islam at just a very young age, right, because he hadn't hit the age of discernment. He wasn't accountable at that time, so he was just always Muslim. But he also, because he was just with the Prophet who didn't engage in this idolatry, he wasn't engaged in it as well. There's other things that were happening in that regard throughout the course of it. There's not like a ton that we know of this part in Mecca because there's not so many people who are talking about everything that transpires at that time because he's not a prophet at that time. Do you know what I mean? He's got these people who come to Islam later. Halima Sa'diya, she becomes Muslim later. Ayman Baraka, she becomes Muslim. Like there's these figures who are there, but you're gonna see a lot more in the Seerah literature from what is Medinese, like from Medina, because it's just a very different time at that point, right? Pre-prophethood is a little different from post-prophethood because of everything that's going on, you know? And you think about it, even on a tangible level, right? People that you know who are well-known figures, like every so often, someone will say, I went to high school with that guy, right? My daughter, she likes to tell me that Alicia Keys went to her elementary school, you know, when she was at elementary school. And I was like, that's amazing, Medina. Like, and she's like, yeah, Baba, she went here. And I was like, yeah. And then I don't know, the conversation just stops, right? You know, but nobody would be saying that if she hadn't become who she was, right? So there's that kind of connecting point there. Do you see what I mean? And people start paying attention a little bit differently when different things now elevate recognition in certain ways, right? So what I wanted to focus on today a lot was just the primary occupation of the Prophet and what we're taught are occupations of prophets of God across the board is that he was specifically in the role of being a shepherd, right? And not just a shepherd, but a shepherd of sheep. What I'd like you to do is turn to the people next to you, pairs, probably not more than 3, if that's okay, so everyone can talk. Exchange names if you don't know the names of the people sitting next to you. Why do you think this is a part of the preparation for the Prophet in terms of what's going to come? Right? In particular, a shepherd of sheep. Like, what role does this play in his own kind of preparation and training? And think about it contextually from within the prism of what a Meccan society is. If you've ever been to Mecca, or you've seen pictures, or you want to stereotype it, right? Probably looks exactly the way you think it does in your head, you know? But why do you think that there is a deliberate gain from the Prophet being a shepherd of sheep. And we'll come back then and discuss, but go ahead. Okay, so what are some of the things that are coming up? Like why a shepherd of sheep? Right, because this man is the son of Abdullah. He is the grandson of Abdul Muttalib. He is from like the cream of the crop in terms of lineage. People love him. You know, they have a deep kind of adoration for him. Why is he a shepherd of sheep? He could be anything, fundamentally, right? What did you discuss? Yeah.
Well, one of the things we discussed is the act of unity that goes into that work, knowing that he, in his line of work, has to consistently work on keeping the sheep together, and then translating that to his prophethood later on, the idea of keeping the ummah together and grounding them in this common cause and this common direction. So I'm sure that it instilled in him a lot of humbling moments of patience, which he later on, was amazing at.
Okay, great. There's a lot of things there, so let's just kind of keep a track of them mentally. What else? What did we discuss? So we talked about patience, keeping the sheep together. Yeah.
Just like financially, isn't he in like Abu Talib's house and they don't actually have that much income? And so he has to work, and that's the only form of work that he can actually find.
Financially, it's a job, right? He's got to have a job. Yeah. What else? That's it, just those three things? Yeah. Yeah.
I'll just add another thing we talked about was his time for reflection. It wasn't necessarily like a line of work that required talking to people all the time, and with that comes a lot of social distractions. So he had time to conceptualize during his work.
Yeah, great. Reflection. Anything else? Yeah.
Sheep require like guidance in a way like from the shepherd, but even with the guidance, like sheep will sometimes stray off. So that teaches a lot of like lenience as well, of understanding that even if someone's given guidance, they might not follow completely in the path that you like set them on. And on top of that, in the wild and stuff like that, they also need to be protected in a way. So like a combination of both of it.
Amazing. Anything else? Yeah.
This is more of a question.
No. I'm asking you a question. You ask me a question right now. Huh? What's your question? Sorry, I'm just a jerk.
Before the Prophet was like receiving revelation, what's kind of the basis for how he conducted himself? What's like the framework of his worldview as to how he behaves and how? Because if you have no guidance from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then you can do anything. You could, calculating not eat pork or do all these things. What was his mindset in terms of what it was to do the right thing when he doesn't have guidance from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala?
Well, a lot of it is going to be a product of his socialization, and some of it is going to be rooted in an understanding of just kind of like divine guidance, right? There's nothing without meaning in Allah's plan, but if you see the people who are in his life, as we've been talking about in detail over the last few weeks, right? These are not individuals who are just characters in a book that have some depth to them the way characters develop, but beyond what you might get exposed to in a screenplay or a text or a movie. These are people who historically entire lives, and they're interacting and they're shaping and nurturing like what this young man's worldview is going to be. So all of these things contribute to that perspective and that mindset in terms of how he's engaging like this Meccan society. So for example, in the last couple of classes, we talked about the women who raised the Prophet of God, right? And how he's got 4 mothers, essentially. One who is his actual mother, Amina, and his 3 women who nurse him, Thuwayba, Ayman Baraka, and Halima Saadiya. Right? We won't go into too much detail because we already talked about it. And how even amongst them there's diversity. So how when he is a prophet or he's older, will he not advocate for women's rights when there's 4 women that raise him, right? How will he not be in a place where he speaks out against racism in all of its form and classism when he's grown up with the Banu Sa'ad, who are a Bedouin tribe but not so much, as well as like he has a nurse mother, a milk mother, who's also a black woman, do you know? So these things are all parts of what are shaping and informing his worldview, right, and his perspectives. In terms of the shepherding, like other thoughts, anything before we start to break this down a little bit more? Yeah.
I think it also kind of teaches you to take into account others' view, because sheep are living creatures and you have to take into account that when you're traveling.
Yeah, amazing. Anything else before we go on?
I thought it was a nice foreshadowing or representation of what he's going to take on later in his life, which is to invest in some spirits.
Yeah, great. So let's kind of think about this now on a practical level, okay? I'm a shepherd. What do I need to be a shepherd? Huh? Sheep. Where do I get the sheep from? From who? The sheep man? Is that what you said? That's not a thing. Where do I get the sheep from? I'm a shepherd. Whose sheep am I looking after?
Working for someone?
Huh?
Are you working for someone?
How does it work when you're a shepherd? Whose sheep do you look after? Are you looking after your own sheep? Right? But like he's working to make money from looking after sheep. So how is he getting his sheep? There's somebody else's sheep, right? That person is paying him to look after the sheep. Why is that important to understand as a variable?
Trust.
In terms of what you were saying before, why does he have to keep all of these sheep together? Huh?
Someone offering the job.
You're a shepherd. I got 40 sheep. I gave you 40 sheep and paid you to look after my 40 sheep. If you come back with 35 sheep, what's going to happen? A lot of things could happen. These are people who bury their daughters alive in the ground, right? He's not keeping them together because of just like his goodness. The shepherd of sheep is entrusted by the owner of the sheep to look after the sheep. In preparation of prophethood, his responsibility is still something that has accountability to it, that he is now in this relationship with the divine, and Allah is saying, you are responsible for all of humanity till the end of time. Somebody gives you 40 sheep, you better come back with 40 sheep. You don't get to say, well, that sheep was dumb, he didn't listen to me. Or that sheep's wool was a little darker than the other wool. Or that sheep, he didn't really want to like eat the same grass as this other sheep. I gave you 40, you got to look after all 40. Every single one has dignity to it. وَلَقَدْ كَرَمْنَا بَنِي آدَمَ, the Quran says, right? This is a theology of human sanctity in Islam. All of the children of Adam are dignified. The shepherd has to be able to look after what the person that he is taking as a client is entrusting him with, whether you want to or not. I didn't sleep so well. This person was mad at me last night. I'm sorry, I'm this and that. The sheep will die if you do not look after the sheep. The sheep could eat something that will kill the sheep. They could have something that would then spread amongst all of the sheep. There's a lot of different variables that are there, but point number one, the shepherd is still working for somebody. There's still a mechanism of accountability to the divine. You want to think about this conversation we're going to have in relation to a hadith where the Prophet ﷺ says, "Kullukum ra'in," all of you are shepherds. Every single one of you. وَكُلُّكُمْ, and each one of you, mas'ulun, are responsible an ra'iyati, of your flocks. This word mas'ul is not responsibility in that sense. It's got within it the derivative of the word for question, sawal, in Arabic, right? If you speak Hindi or Urdu, it's got cognates, sawal. So it's saying, all of you are shepherds, and you're going to be asked about the ones you're responsible for. You are going to be questioned about the ones you're responsible for. And it doesn't need for us to believe in it in order for it to be true. Who is it that is entrusting us to look after this becomes a critical variable in understanding and how to uphold responsibility. It's not just because I love all of you that I try to do for you what I can. I am going to stand in front of my God, and I am going to have to explain that with whatever He gave to me, what did I do with it? How did I honor the rights of people that were leaning on me? How did I get done not just what I wanted to get done, or why did I not do the things that I didn't do, but why did I also not do what I had the ability to do and still chose not to do it? So the owner of the sheep is important in this construct. You are not going to fulfill your role as a shepherd if you don't get that everything is owned by the divine. And all of these people who are fighting for dunya, thinking that that's the end all be all, they're going to stand in front of God one day too. The conviction cannot be empowering as the way our theology is meant to be. Not just creed that is memorized, but faith within creed. They're two different things. It will not be empowering if you don't actually believe in it. So you can dress how somebody else dresses, and you can eat what someone else eats. You can't believe something just because somebody else believes it. Belief is within you. It's subjective. You have your conviction. And so here, the shepherd has somebody that he has to bring the sheep back to. The prophet still has to do what Allah is asking of him to do. Kullukum ra'in, all of you are shepherds. You also have an accountability to the divine. You're not given spiritual gifts because you deserve them. If we were given what we were given simply because we deserve it, this is not an Islamic theology. It's a prosperity doctrine that at its base is quite racist in its undertone, because it sets up with ease for those who have power and privilege to tell those who don't have power and privilege, well, if God really wanted you to have it or loved you, He would have given it to you. His love for us shows that He gave us all of this wealth and affluence. This is what white people can tell black people as to why they don't have so much. That's not an Islamic doctrine. If anything, our theology teaches us that the poor, the destitute, the miskeen, they're the ones who will have easier entrance into Jannah. May Allah make us all people of paradise. So reflecting on this, the shepherd has somebody whose sheep he's looking after. He didn't just grab some random sheep and said, I'm going to look after all of you now, right? There is an actual structure to this relationship. Shepherds of sheep are important to understand in comparison to other animals that you can look after. Because a camel is not the same as a sheep. Neither is a horse. I don't know if any of you have ever ridden a horse or a camel before. Has anybody ever ridden a horse before? Yeah. Has anybody ever ridden a camel before? Has anybody ever played with a sheep before? Are they like horses and camels? No, they're not. They're very different. And when you think about even the physical makeup of a sheep, the shepherd is literally standing, and the sheep has limited foresight. The way that the sheep's physicality creates perception is going to be now just within the confines of what is in their immediate proximity. The sheep relies on the shepherd to be able to think about what's coming ahead. It can't see so far in the distance. It's not able to look that far. The camel will walk away from you and not even talk to you. The horse might bite you if you don't treat it well. The sheep can only look at what's right in front of it. The shepherd relates to it differently because it's a part of its process. It has to have vision as a shepherd. It can't be limited when taking care of a creature that already has limited perspective. You see? A sheep is very vulnerable when it's alone. There's other animals that they could survive and live in various ways by themselves, right? A hippo is not in as much danger as a sheep. A whale could swim around by itself and it's good. But you think about this thing now, that if it gets separated, what is it being protected from? You think about for your own self. When do you fall most privy to the waswasa of shaitan, the whispers of shaitan? When do you fall into negative thoughts quite often? You get stuck in your own head. When do you feel as if everything is crumbling? We do a healing space on Monday, and like 400 people signed up to attend this thing. They're carrying heaviness, they're carrying pain. If some of you are in the room and you are hearing people talk, a good number of them said, it's just good to be around other people who get it. In that construct, there's 3 different roles that can be played. You're the shepherd, you're the sheep, or you're the predator. And we have a dual role derived from this aspect now of the prophetic biography, that you are going to both be a sheep and a shepherd. You're not only just the one that is guiding, you will also need to be guided. It's just a part of inherently who it is that we are. And this shepherd plays a critical role of keeping everybody together. But kullukum ra'in, all of you are shepherds, then you got to do your part too. You got to make sure that it's not just that on the day of Eid, everybody comes and prays next to each other, and then nobody actually has meaningful interactions. And you all are blessed in that you sit in community space here where there is a lot more diversity than other places. A generation in our tradition is not attached just to shared age. The Prophet had companions who were as old as Uncle Hamza, as well as young as his grandsons, Hassan and Hussein. May Allah be pleased with all of them. There are people that go across a spectrum of race, ethnicity, class. Togetherness is not just physical bodies being together. It's hard, but you want to be able to celebrate the sadness that you feel when undeniable oppression is permeating every aspect of imagery that you're consuming, from your ears to your eyes, everything. Because it'd be a lot worse if you weren't sad about what was happening. There's a lot of people who aren't sad. It would be a lot worse if you didn't feel some type of pain within you when you see inequity and injustice taking place. Allah is the one that gives you emotions in the first place, and they could be all kinds of different things, but at a base, they're data points. They're telling you about you. And if you were to put somebody who is intellectualizing somebody's struggle to be able to explain why it is on the oppressed demographic to be responsible for the oppression that is coming at them, and you run around in your head trying to say, how does this make any sense? It doesn't make any sense. But amidst all of it, you can say, thank God that I have a heart that's not dead, and it's wakeful, and it still feels pain when it sees things that should be painful. You're going to be a shepherd, you could be a sheep. You definitely don't ever want to be a wolf. In this scenario, you don't want to be the cause of what segments, what breaks apart, what divides. That's not something that we see that the Prophet is learning in this tutelage from the divine in this phase of his pre-prophet existence. The sheep are stronger when they're all together. This is not a time to be alone. The sheep are more robust when they're in a flock. You want to stick with each other and connect to each other in meaningful ways. You come into spaces, don't let people be just on their own. Don't be in anybody's face if they want to be by themselves, but you understand what it is that I'm saying. So here, the nature of the sheep is important to understand. That aspect of patience and leniency, forbearance, right? Kana ahlam an-nas, the hadith says that the Prophet was the most forbearant of people. Hilm is a way to say intellect in Arabic. Ahlam are dreams. When we talk about forbearance as halim, it shares the root letters with these words. When a child is nursed and it's in a frenzy, if you've ever had a baby in your life that's crying because it's hungry, this is just how children express themselves. And now when it is brought to its mother's chest and it is suckled, it turns into just this extremely calm being. It's like a totally different world. It has this same root, halama. This is what the Prophet's forbearance level is. Kana ahlam an-nas. Now I want you to think about this because it's an important question. The Prophet's profession is a source for bringing him forbearance and contentment, stability. What do your jobs bring to you? What does your work bring to you? A consumer-driven society heavily equates senses of self to be equated primarily to what you do as a profession. When most of you walk into most spaces you go to, when you're a student, you're going to say to others, "What do you study?" When you are not a student, you're going to say, "What do you do?" Why? Why is that the first thing you say? Because you're so trained to just think about yourself as a worker and that your job is the primary mode of your identity. Most of you have no idea what any of the rest of you do in this room professionally. You just have nothing as an identity because of that? Or are you actually in a space where you get to be yourself? You get to be known by your character, your sense of integrity. You get to be known by your values and your ethics, not just an arbitrary title that creates stratification that makes no sense. Why are teachers not paid as much as people who work in business? Why is a janitor not valued as much as somebody who is working in corporate settings? Some of you went to this farm with us. Like, I don't even remember. Days are a blur right now. When did we go to the farm? Last Monday, right? So a week and a half ago. And when we were waiting for the buses, my son Kareem was with me. And I told him I'd get him some donuts. And I walked into Dunkin' Donuts, and everybody that was on this bus was at Dunkin' Donuts, apparently. And there was a guy that was standing behind me who works in this building as part of facilities. It's 7 in the morning, and I said to him, "You're here this early?" And he said, "I get here at 3 o'clock in the morning every day." And he said, "I work from 3 a.m. and I leave at about 1 p.m. And I said, "Kareem, this man is responsible for ensuring that we have a beautiful place to pray. When the entire world is asleep, he comes out of his home in the middle of the night when trains are not running so well and it is not so safe, and he takes his route here and walks through this building when it's empty, vacuums things, cleans up after the wudu that we make at Jummah, does all of these different things that are going on so that we'll have this place to pray. How can you not value this person?" By virtue of what exactly? So you want to think from a work-life balance standpoint. All of us don't have to have jobs that also bring us this sense of meaning. A job can just be a job, but there's got to be a start and a stop to it. Do you ever sit and say, I believe that the prophet was a prophet, and my favorite part of him was that he was a shepherd? Probably not. But you think about how this part of his existence is contributing to his overall sense of being. And where and how you have an understanding of asking questions, like how much money is actually enough? If you don't have an answer to this question, you are going to continue to chase after dunya to a point that it is going to just engulf your heart in its entirety. How much wealth is enough? And you can meet a lot of people who have money. They have comfort, but a lot of them don't necessarily have contentment. Some do and some don't, but it's not a product of the amount of wealth that they have that's the source of their contentment. And I could put you in front of people who are really rich, and all they have is anxiety. Because money can be a big fitna. May Allah protect us from it. So if you don't design your life, someone else will design it for you. And if there's not a mode of being able to recognize that my sense of self cannot be an equal sign between what I do professionally and what my sense of self-worth is. So here, the Prophet has a job that is bringing him some type of benefit. You start to think for yourself, which isn't like, oh man, I work in an office, there's no benefit. No, if your job is bringing to you halal income, then work in your job. But know when the job starts, there's so much more to you. What's creating replenishment? What's creating balance? So the Prophet's got a job that contributes to his character, his values. A lot of us have upward mobility in the systems that we're a part of, not because we exert decisions through ethics, but because we're willing to compromise on ethics. This is why CEOs statistically have the lowest emotional intelligence. And it's usually middle management that statistically has the highest level of emotional intelligence. Because when you get to this place where there's a handful of people that make 100x the time, the money, than what their entry-level employment workers are, you can't have like billions of dollars without exploitation. It's not possible. It necessitates it. And so to go through that trajectory that isn't about making decisions, like I'm going to care for this animal and treat it like it's an actual child of mine, rooted in a sense of values, and then you get to work another day as a shepherd because you brought all of them home safely and sound. Governmental apparatus, corporate sectors, quite often advancement and upward mobility is not rooted in making decisions through a prism of ethics and values, but at a willingness to compromise on those things. One of the other things that's very important here, that is permeating our religion, is to have an understanding of elemental aspects that are just ingrained within our tradition. Your ritual has wudu with water. Your prayer is based off of a cyclical pattern of the sun. You pray in the late hours of the night with dua being more readily accepted. As it gets darker in its shade, the opportunity for more illumination inwardly is directly related to it. How will you know how dark the sky is if you don't look at it? How will you know that it's Fajr time if you're not looking for the sunlight? How will you make wudu without water? And understanding what these things are here. So the Prophet is very much so outside in nature. He's spending time in places that the design is just majestic and beautiful. And this is how we're wired. What I'd like for you to do is turn to the people next to you. Where do you go to find stillness? And if you don't go someplace like regularly, where have you been that you find it? Modernity offers a lot of different things, good and bad. But one of the things that's deeply problematic in the prism of modernity is the diminishing of places of stillness. You cannot have inward agitation and seem to then find balance in a world that is created and very, very clearly just chaotic outside. The chaos that's outside, devoid of any place that brings rest inside, is just a formula for like more chaos, right? So where do you go to find that stillness? And the answer isn't that there's no place in New York City, because that's a lie. You might have to admit that you don't take care of yourself, and that's the first step in then being able to recognize, how do I take care of myself? And I know a lot of you are very busy in this room. I would tell you that I'm probably a lot more busier than most of you. But I still take time to take care of me. I still find moments where I'm engaged in reflection and contemplation and self-care. If I looked at your schedule in the last 5 days, 7 days, what part of your routine would show me that your physical, emotional, mental, spiritual spheres are important to you, that your heart is important to you? So the Prophet, for a big chunk of his time, pre-prophethood, is spending time out in nature. Where do you go to find stillness? With regularity, what would these places be? And you can add to this conversation, what are the spaces you go to that create anxiety and turmoil? 2 things we want to talk about. And then we'll come back and discuss a little bit in terms of where's the balance. Like if this side of chaos and turmoil is 80-90% of your day, your week, and this part of balance is like not even a percentage of a percent, because the rest of the time you're just sleeping or you're in the bathroom, right? It's not going to be a recipe for things that are good. Do you know? So if you turn to the persons next to you, like what are the places of stillness and what are the places of agitation? And then we'll come back and discuss. But go ahead. Okay. So what are some of the things that are coming up? You don't have to tell me specifics, but just the actual engagement in this as a conversation. How is that experientially? Or you can even tell me specifics if you want. Like, do we have places of stillness? Do we have places of reflection? Do we have more that's the opposite of that? Do you know? What's coming up, or what are you noticing in your conversations? Yeah.
So for me, to your point about taking better care of yourself, I think something that I've struggled with for a while now is building like a regular habit of doing some sort of like either dhikr before bed, or they have like Muslim meditation apps now that just even 5 minutes of that every day is something that I've been wanting to implement for a while. I just haven't. But for places of stillness, it's weather dependent, but I really like being by water, like hearing the sound of the waves, not necessarily at a beach, it could be at like Brooklyn Bridge Park or anything. That's just really helpful. It's calming, it's soothing, it reminds me of Allah. And then on the flip side, in terms of the turmoil and anxiety, so I'm going to steal something from what you said, we were just talking about, there was a mention of going to work brings anxiety, and then also even something as simple as being on the subway sometimes. If you're stuck in train traffic, if there's something crazy happening on the train, if you're waiting 15 minutes for your train, like all of that kind of brings that.
Great. Exactly. Okay. Anyone else? Yeah.
I think one of the questions we kind of came up with was like, I kind of interpreted it as like a place where we're practicing mindfulness, whereas potentially another interpretation was just a time where you're not doing too much and you're at peace. I don't think they're necessarily the same thing.
I would say like the idea with having a place of stillness is so that you can exert mindfulness in places where you typically don't have mindfulness. Do you know? The idea isn't like, here's where I have mindfulness, and then the rest of the time I'm just running on default settings. No, like the whole idea is that you have consciousness as much as you can and awareness as much as you can, right? So it's not momentary, but it's the norm. And then it's like other times when, things are a little bit off, you're not sleeping so well, somebody's sick, you lose a loved one, then that's where like you're a little bit less attentive. But the exercise of solitude is meant to increase attentiveness in places of turmoil. So you're not just like a body walking through the street, but you still have a heart that is present in whatever is going on. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah, and for me, I think the two big places is when I'm writing my journal, and I just start kind of writing and see what happens. And then I'm trying to debate if it's before I start praying or after, but I kind of just sit there after and kind of think. And before I pray, I kind of just went through my mind. This might be my last prayer, so I just kind of look at stuff.
Yeah, and it's crazy, right, to think about some of these things. Water, like for the most part, even if someone's scared to get into the water, when you see certain bodies of water, it's just magnificent. When you can hear the sound of it also, it becomes very settling. That's why babies listen to white noise when they sleep. That's why some of us as adults, when we're listening to white noise, we're listening to the rain, we're listening to like sounds of rain, whatever else. Do you know what I mean? Right? The Arabic word for reflection is fikr, and the Arabic word for notebook is mufakkir. It's got the same root in it. There's like connections there. Do you see what I mean? It's not going to look the same for every person. It's going to be different for different people because we're all not the same. Do you know? I like to run in the morning. The days that I don't run in the morning and exercise, I can see that it impacts my overall state of wellness in comparison to the days that I do. That doesn't mean that it's going to be the same thing for you, but you have a sense of awareness. The conundrum here is that you need these places of stillness to create now self-actualization that allows for you to have that opportunity to understand these things, right? Anyone else before we kind of move on? Yeah.
I'm all about chill in like a halal way.
Appreciate the clarification. We were just thinking it's going to be super haram the way that you're doing.
Anybody had a misconception?
Yeah.
I'd rather be alone than be with people. It's just how I grew up. My apartment, I made it super chill. I found a nice quiet corner in Manhattan. When I go there, somebody texts me, I might not reply right away. I get it, blah, blah, blah. I have a cousin who just came from Pakistan. Was talking about, Pakistani people, when they come, that means they want to come live with you. on no departure time. I got this text from my cousin. It's like, oh, I want to hang out. So I said, I'm free Monday through Friday after 3:15, and I can't hang out on the weekends because that's my time. Because I need to do whatever it is I do. And then my family was like, "Aapne to hamari beizati ki." You embarrassed us. You should have took him in and this. And I was like, for my mental health and exactly what you're saying about solitude and peace, like, this is the best I can do. Because if I do any more, I might not be the best version of myself. So at the end of the day, I'm a bad guy. Like if I compromise and then he doesn't see the right side of me because I'm tired or stressed, right? I'm a bad person. But right now, it's like I just picked myself. And I'm all about chilling. So it's like I'm in the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam. That's really something like I think he enjoys certain, like you said, nature and all that stuff. I'm all about solitude.
Amazing.
Yeah, thank you.
So, do you want to say something? Yeah.
Oh, yeah, kind of something about like being alone. What I find myself place near my neighborhood, I have this like, it's in the woods area, but it overlooks the river, Hudson River. It's not the best view, but for me, it's calm. I'm able to sit there and meditate. If I'm right, I'm able to just have free, noise-free, cancer-free shit. I find my job to bring me a lot of
Yeah, me too, man.
but also running too, jogging too, because I try to do it more often, but every once in a while, I try to jog around my neighborhood. That also, so I understand what you mean, that also brings me back to it.
Yeah, alhamdulillah. And you want to think, right? Now as you know things about yourself, which is what we say here, right? A key ingredient to contentment is taking what you know and acting on what you know and keeping them close to each other. So if I know certain things bring me upliftment, why am I not doing those things? And if I know other things give me complacency instead of contentment or cause me agitation, why am I only frequenting those places? Some we don't have a choice. Like, you just got to go to work. Like, what are you going to do? Do you know? But what you do after it has to also have mindfulness. If you say yes to certain things, you're inevitably saying no to other things. So you build boundaries and you say, you know what, maybe I'm not going to go and do everything that everybody else is doing on a Friday, Saturday, Sunday. I'm just going to take this day for me and I'm going to recharge and replenish because that's okay. And me picking myself is not selfish, but I need this. I need to be separate from some of the things that create chaos. Some of the other things that like this does, just as we're going to wrap up, the shepherd's lifestyle is very simple. Right? You don't like see shepherds and their lifestyle is just like crazy Mr. Beast like world, you know? They're shepherds. Do you know what I mean? What does a shepherd's lifestyle seem like is exactly what you think it's going to seem like. Simplicity. There's not so much. How can you even be carrying like a lot of things that are just ornamental when you are looking after animals? There's no fundamental way you can do that. What can you do? Like, think about it. Think about how it works, do you know? And this is how people work here in different ways also. My son and I, during COVID, I think I've shared this story in different settings, but think about it in this way. People don't care about their employees, right? If you are responsible for people, kullukum ra'in, you also have to love the people that work for you. So I own different businesses, and I walked into a cupcake store with my son, and my wife and my daughter were standing outside, and we were going to a friend's house at a time when we were just getting used to going to people's houses again. We walked into this place, and you know how things were in Manhattan during COVID, as well as like in New York City. And we're in this place buying cupcakes, and there's one guy that's working in there, and he's got like just no chair, he's not standing on anything. And I just asked him, how are you, man? Are you okay? And he said, everything's great. And I was like, no, how are you really doing? And I said, do you work here all alone? And he said, yeah. And I said, I'm so sorry that's the case. And he was like, oh, you know, I just am happy I have a job. But you have to think, if you maybe don't think, because you're not a business owner, I own a business as I have staff. I have staff here. We do programs where we have to take care of all of you. So I got to think about things like, hey, when will these people go to the bathroom? How can a person go to the bathroom when they're the only one working at an entire store? And then that person has to be mindful that they're going to be the only one working an entire shift, so what they eat is going to be relevant to what that 9 hours is going to look like. Let alone if the guy that in the midst of the pandemic was wealthy enough to go live in another house, and the person on shift number 2 decides they're not coming, they're going to tell shift number 1, if you don't stay, you're going to lose your job. So now they're working a double on their feet with no chair, and they have to eat and drink according to what this actual routine is, because there's cameras everywhere. Can they lock the front door, and then the guy sitting on his couch wherever he's at looking at the store is going to call and say, why is there nobody behind the desk? What do you think a human can do? He's a human. And so we talked for 5 minutes, and then this guy came from behind the thing, and he gave me a big hug. My son was a little younger at that time. He said, "Baba, is that your friend?" I said, "No." And he said, "Why is he hugging you?" I said, "Because nobody notices him." And that's not what our prophet is like. He notices everybody. He knows when there's somebody with anxiety, ask them about it. He knows how to treat a little bird well. Do you know? And so somebody says, like, well, how do you start to see the world that way? You just follow the sunnah. And when you follow the sunnah inwardly and outwardly, like what you're saying, you look at this view of the Hudson River. When you see calm, it brings calm to you. When you see chaos, it's going to bring chaos to you. I don't know why a lot of you watch what you watch. Forget about haram and halal and whatever else. You watch things that are crazy in terms of their script and like characters being bludgeoned to death and all kinds of like weird treachery and betrayal and whatever else. And it's being consumed by your inside. Versus the way that you're built, you can just look at a still river that even is so, it's not even a clean river. You cannot swim in the Hudson River. You cannot swim in the East River. But even just looking at it brings you calm. So you start to think, how do these other things bring me chaos? And I don't want to seek complacency. It gives me something for the moment, but in the long term, it's adding to the agitation. So don't have simplistic, reductive understandings of religion that say lowering your gaze is just in this kind of surface level understanding of gender interactions, but you're lowering your gaze because this thing that I consume that is visually pornographic, not in terms of like sexuality or anything, but from every other aspect is overtly taking on my senses in a way that it is just clouding my inside with all kinds of things. Reality in and of itself is hard enough to see, let alone you're looking at things that are fictitious that are also just adding to the conundrum. So go look at things that are beautiful sometimes, that are just always beautiful. Go look at the sunrise, go look at the sunset, go be in nature. The shepherd's life is simple. You don't need so much, man. Really, like, what do you need? We said it on live stream after live stream during the pandemic when we only existed virtually, which was hard. But I said it to people a ton of times. Do not forget, because the world will make you forget that you are living right now and you are not buying so many things. There's nothing to go and buy. You're not going to eat out every week. You're still sustaining yourself. The clutter stopped because supply chains were impacted, stores were closed, consumer rates dropped, and you were still good. How did you get through a pandemic if not the consumption of what is just physical being limited contributed to your being able to get through a couple of years that were just really hellish? Now you're in a place where I don't even remember any of those things. I'm just buying and buying and buying and buying. What is it doing for you? Just giving you more clutter? Do you even know how many pieces of clothing you own? Do you know how many articles of clothing you possess? Why? And it's not. This is why I said like 20 minutes ago, you have to ask, how much is enough? Because it's just numbing like what is there. And simplicity just brings ease. It allows for you to not have to worry about so many things. You come into a space like this, what do we have in here? A carpet, some chairs, windows. That's it. You can go into spaces and find ease, not because they are chaotic, but because they're just simple. You can look at a river. It's just simple. You can enjoy certain things. My son and I, he's like an early riser, mashallah. And there's times when we're just sitting and we're on our couch. Yo, some of you have been to our apartment. The rest of you should come over too. right? And we're just sitting on the couch looking out the window. The sun is rising the way that it always rises. And he's like snuggling with me, and we're looking out the window, and we're just talking to each other. And then at night when we go to sleep, and I say, Kareem, how was your day today? What did you like? And he tells me the different things that he enjoyed. And when he says, and Baba, one of my favorite times was when we were just looking out the window together and talking. It's because I don't have to take him to an amusement park for him to feel close. It doesn't have to be like all these grand things. It can just be simple. That's just what it is. It's simple. And the Prophet, as a shepherd, is living a life of simplicity. That's just what the lifestyle is conducive to. You could go make a ton of money. You still can live a very simple life. You can go have multiple degrees. You still can live a simple life. And simplicity doesn't mean that we're just gonna live in this kind of opposite of anything dunyawi, and my family of 8 is gonna live in one bedroom and we're gonna sleep on the floor with no sheets and whatever. No, man, that's not what simplicity is. But just think of how much clutter you have in your life. Just think about it. Think about all the stuff you have. All of it. All of the stuff. When I started working here, I slept on a couch for 3 years in a 1-bedroom apartment with 5 guys. And when I moved into the apartment I live in now, in 2008, everything that I had fit into just the corner of the window of our living room area. I didn't have so many things. It doesn't mean that I didn't grow up with a lot of different things, but when I walked into this place, I said, what am I going to do with all of this space? I don't have any stuff. And so I just started letting my friends and random guys, right? It's Pakistani guys that don't leave. The number of guys I had to trick to get out of my house because they just came and they just wouldn't leave, right? But you don't need so much stuff. What you need is friendship. What you need is people you can lean on. What you need are experiences, not things. You need to know how you are wired and built, and simplicity is part of it. You eat simply, it doesn't mess up your system. When you eat things that are unnecessarily complex and not made for humans to eat, that's when your body stops functioning well. When you don't have simple routines, it's hard to sleep. Why is it hard to sleep? Not because of simplicity, but because of unnecessary complexity to things, right? Clutter. Clutter gets in the way. Just a lot of stuff. There's always stuff. And then there's all these thoughts that are around things that I just have to constantly be in a state of anxiety about. What is this man's thoughts like throughout his 20s? He's standing with a bunch of sheep. All they're doing is eating grass. He's looking at them eat the grass, and he's just in nature. How do you think his thoughts are at that time? What do you think is going on in his head? You think he's got all the stuff going on in his head that you and I have going on in our head? The things that just have us constantly feeling exhausted. So you bring in some of that, and this is what the shepherd's lifestyle was like. Simplicity, and that's just it. And then it allows for energy to go out and be kind, to be generous. It's simple, right? I really like this thing. You can like it too? Here, just give it to you. One of my good friends who, I won't say his name, just because I don't know. He's a nice guy. His name is Ridwan Falah. I don't think I'd be Muslim if it wasn't for Ridwan. He was an upperclassman when I was a freshman at NYU. He's one of the kindest people I ever met. And this guy literally, man, we'd be walking down the street. He's got this beautiful scarf shawl on his neck. And another guy says to him, that thing's so beautiful. He just takes it off and gives it to him. But it's not even any semblance of hubris to it. You just know he just genuinely wants him to have it. And he's not even attached to it, right? Ali radiallahu anh, he says detachment isn't to not own anything of the world. Detachment is to not let anything of the world own you. That you are in possession of your possessions. Your possessions don't possess you. And this is what this simplicity life brings. Do you know what I mean? So all of these variables, like we want to think about as he's being prepped to be a prophet of God, what is it that he's getting ready for in it? And how is it that he is arguably one of the most impactful, if not the impactful human beings in the world, regardless of whether you believe in him as a prophet or not. And he's able to get it done with these building blocks that are now influencing perspective, worldview, influencing self-care, wellness, all of these kinds of things. Okay. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
We hope you enjoyed our podcast. If you're inspired by the work that we're doing at the IC and want to help keep it going, subscribe to our podcasts, follow us on social media, donate to help support us at ICNYU.org, and most importantly, keep us in your continued du'as. Until next time, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum.